What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, February 5th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 9-game slate tonight on DraftKings, 11 games on FanDuel. Going to be diving into the DraftKings slate, looking at how I'd be approaching it right now, and more importantly for you guys, just talking through every game, injuries we're waiting on, things that I found interesting in looking at them, talking about my minutes projections, all of that stuff, what looks good to me, what doesn't. We'll take a look at how ownership looks right now as well. So going to be doing all of that. I forgot to load my minutes in, which just makes things easier on the show. So going to go ahead and do that now. But yeah, we have some injury news at the top. Not too crazy of a slate injury-wise right now, at least. So knock on wood, that remains the case. Obviously, with the trade deadline being tomorrow, there is a chance also that we just get news between now and lock that we're not expecting, but hopefully we don't. We already had the Kyle Kuzma and Chris Middleton trade today. Both of those teams play, but that was early enough in the day that we were able to, be prepared for that at least. So going to walk through everything as usual. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in chat and I will get to those as I see them. So starting with the Spurs and the Hawks, we do have a Q tag on Chris Paul. Also in general, just questions about exactly what the Spurs rotation is going to look like. De'Aaron Fox in his first game with the team. My assumption for the starting lineup here is De'Aaron Fox, Castle, Vassell, Barnes, and Wemby, with Paul playing off the bench and probably playing, some minutes alongside De'Aaron Fox. I have Paul in for like 24 minutes right now. But Paul is questionable. If he's out, I don't think that there are huge implications there, like there would have been if this were before Fox joined the team. But I do think that it would help solidify Castle's minutes, probably playing like low 30s instead of upper 20s. It probably means more minutes for like Champagny, Sohan, Keldon Johnson off the bench, just like those wings kind of soaking up more minutes. So I don't think that if Paul ends up missing, there's one guy that looks like a lot better, but I do think there's a few guys that look marginally better that maybe you would get to a little bit more. But for right now, with Paul projected in, Wemby showing up in 17% of my lineups, 24% ownership projected to him, just looks really good. 10-8, certainly a good price tag for him. You get the block upside, defensive stat upside, which is always really nice. It's nice whenever, you can get increased volatility from somebody that doesn't rely on them scoring, just because it's something that isn't already baked into the Vegas total. It's completely, separate from that. So somebody like Wemby just gives you really nice volatility, goes without saying in tournaments. If you can get to him, great. De'Aaron Fox here at 8K. I think this one's interesting just because we are guessing at exactly how many minutes he's going to play, both in the short term and long term for the Spurs. He was playing 37 minutes a night in Sacramento. I don't have him projected for that here. I have him in for 34 minutes. Okay, well, that's going to change everything that I did to prep for this show, because I think Joe Val is my second highest owned guy right now. So going forward, my player exposures are completely irrelevant on this show, and I'm going to just talk through the games individually because the slate is completely different now than it was 2 minutes ago. So you can comfortably ignore anything in the exposure column from now until the end of the show. But getting back to De'Aaron Fox here, we are guessing, it's his first game with the Spurs. So question one is there any sort of easing in period? Do they just play him like 30, 32 minutes in game number one? Or do they run him out for full minutes? And then question two is, what are full minutes on the Spurs? So I think 34 minutes is a very reasonable projection here. If I were getting, it's one of those situations where when I ran all of this, if I were getting like 40% De'Aaron Fox at 34 minutes, I'd probably go ahead and just cut it to like 32 and a half or 33, because I, along with everyone else, have absolutely no idea what the actual answer is here. But 34 just feels like a good middle ground, considering that, obviously the Spurs want him and want him to play a lot of minutes. And it's not like he missed, he's not coming back from injury or anything. He didn't miss any time. Like, he's clearly in shape. So De'Aaron Fox here at 8K, I think perfectly fine in tournaments. Jeremy Sohan, Devin Vassell, just secondary options that, again, would look a little bit better, I think, if Chris Paul ends up missing. Tizzleman said for CD, they already traded him. He was part of the Levine Fox trade. He is with, I have no idea who now, but not the Spurs. So not for him. Certainly let me know if we see who the Spurs or who the oh, never mind. Yeah, I take that back. He was with the Kings. They traded him to the Kings. I was confused because I was on the Spurs and he used to be on the Spurs. So yeah, just ignore that. Anyway, on to the Atlanta side. No Q tags that we have to worry about here. We do not have Jalen Johnson still. We don't have Clint Capella still. We don't have Bogdan Bogdanovic still. Trae Young is probable. Nothing else on the injury report matters. So I'm assuming that we're going to get DeAndre Hunter in the starting lineup again. And if we do, I like him quite a bit here at 5,700. He'd been playing a lot of minutes off the bench anyway without Bogdanovic and without Jalen Johnson. He's pretty much locked into that sixth man role. Atlanta was basically spot starting guys, whether that was Mo Gay or whether it was, I'm completely blanking on Dominic Barlow's name. And then you were getting Hunter closing. Then they moved him into the starting lineup last game. He played about 30 minutes, but one thing that was really interesting, if you look at Atlanta's rotation in that game against Detroit, is that DeAndre Hunter actually was in significant foul trouble at the start of the third quarter. He only played 1 minute and 53 seconds, picked up 3 fouls to open the second half, went to the bench for the rest of the third quarter. Now, he did sub back in at the start of the fourth and play the entire fourth quarter. Whereas if you look at his first half rotation, he subs in with 8 minutes and 10 seconds to go in the second quarter. So he kind of like bought back 4 minutes probably at the start of the fourth, but he also probably lost like 6-7 minutes at the start of the third. So my point here is that he played between 30 and 31 minutes, and he did probably lose a couple of minutes. So in a perfect world, you were probably looking at like a 33, 34-minute game from Hunter. I think that projecting him around 31 minutes here is a good projection, but there is upside for more. I don't think that's like projecting his ceiling or anything like that. So it makes him look pretty good here at 5,700. Trae Young with no Jalen Johnson. We know, plenty of upside for him getting right around the field, but again, completely irrelevant on that. I think the 12% ownership makes sense. And keep in mind, these ownership numbers are going to change drastically now, too. There's just going to be more value with Rashawn Holmes on the slate. But 9,600 for Trae Young looks good. And again, the more value you have, the less that salary matters, too. It becomes a situation where, you're just trying to get raw points into your lineup after you put in good value plays if a lot of value opens up between now and lock. Risache, 4,500. I talked about it the other day on a show, but in games without Bogdanovic and Jalen Johnson, he's actually played a pretty decent amount of minutes. He's averaged like 28 minutes per game. Now it's down to 26, his median, but it was 29 last game. Then he played 25 minutes. Point here being that you're not getting the like fake starts from Risache with those guys out. So expecting 25, 26 minutes from him makes sense. And he does have upside for more. This is the type of play, though, along with really DeAndre Hunter. Obviously, I think Hunter is a better play than Risache, but it's the type of play that is going to get squeezed the more value that opens up. These mid-range guys where it's like, yeah, they're pretty good point per dollar values. They're solid, like last guy in type plays. They just get squeezed out because the cheap plays end up being the best point per dollar values. And then you're just chasing raw point upside at the top. So those types of plays do get squeezed in favor of somebody like Trae Young. But Dyson Daniel, 7,300, should play, 34, 35, 36 minutes, somewhere in there. He gives you plenty of defensive stat upside as well, just like I was talking about with Wemby on the other side, because he's so good at getting steals. So there is upside for him, but I think, really is pretty much correctly priced. And then Okongwu, we're just continuing to see like 28 minutes or so from him in these games without Clint Capella, which is kind of disappointing from a DFS standpoint. The potential was there for him to play a lot more, but we're seeing him and Larry Nance basically split 48 minutes with Okongwu getting around 28 or so, and then Nance playing like 19 to 20. So Okongwu, last guy in, sure, but not any sort of a priority. Right now, I think DeAndre Hunter looks like the best play. But again, with value opening up, you could see Hunter kind of get flipped by Trae Young as far as being the best play from Atlanta. For Cleveland, we had a completely clean injury report to start the day. Now we have a Q tag on Donovan Mitchell. It's the back-to-back. They played Boston yesterday. If I had to guess right now, I would say Mitchell probably sits, but this is a 7 o'clock game, so I'm not overly concerned about it. We'll have that information by the time the slate starts. If he does sit, obviously it's going to make Darius Garland look better. It's going to make Evan Mobley look better. It's going to make Ty Jerome look better, assuming he would move into the starting lineup and look like a good value play. But for right now, if we assume that Donovan Mitchell is in, I think you're basically just looking at all of the starters on Cleveland as secondary options, some are going to look a little bit more appealing than others. I think Darius Garland probably looks the most appealing because of that $7,600 salary. But any of Garland, Mobley, Mitchell, Strus, Allen at their respective salaries, if they land in your lineup, great. But I don't think any of them are guys you're prioritizing. It's more so you're just saying, hey, there's this team of really good players. They have like a 121 team total in a solid matchup against Detroit. There's a pretty good chance one of them just goes out and has a big game. But it's difficult to pinpoint which one outside of just saying like Darius Garland's really good, Mobley's really good, Mitchell's really good, etc. So I think Garland would be the one that I like the most. Certainly would like him a lot more if Donovan Mitchell ends up missing this game. I am trying to quickly pull up Cleveland's rates without Mitchell on the floor just to see how they look. Overall this season, 1.25 DraftKings points per minute for Garland, 1.13 for Allen, 1.26 for Mobley. If you take Mitchell off the floor, Garland jumps to 1.4, Allen's at 1.27, Mobley is at 1.38. So you do get a really nice bump for Evan Mobley and for Darius Garland in particular, as you would expect. LeVert would look better too, Nate, if Mitchell is out. I'm assuming he would come off the bench and they would start Jerome. They could start LeVert. The thing with LeVert is that he's essentially useless from a DFS standpoint whenever he's on the floor with Mitchell Garland. But if Mitchell is out, then you're going to get at least a subset of LeVert's minutes without Garland or Mitchell, because they will most likely stagger Garland LeVert in that situation. So he would look better. He is, I assume, still very inexpensive as well. $4K for LeVert. So he would look better too. I'd forgotten about him, but he would look better if Mitchell is out. I mean, Sam Merrill at 3,300 looks better if Mitchell is out. Ty Jerome, 4,800, as I mentioned. I assume you would get Jalen Tyson in the rotation. That's another guy that I guess could start, but I assume wouldn't. But yeah, basically right now it just looks like a team where I think you're looking at the starters and saying, hey, any of these guys are fine. If Mitchell's out, you're looking at this team and saying, hey, there's a lot of priorities here. On the Detroit side, tough matchup, obviously. Another team that I think is just full of secondary plays. Jalen Duren would be the most appealing at 6,400. Gives you a lot of rebound upside. He's been playing more minutes lately, which is, I think, it's kind of weird, like how to talk about Jalen Duren playing more minutes right now, because I think by design, he's always been intended to play like upper 20s, lower 30s in minutes. I don't think it's like the coaching staff had a change of heart and now they're playing him more. He just hasn't been getting in foul trouble lately, which may be just variance, or it may be an active effort by him to not get in foul trouble, like he's changed something. But he has been pretty consistently avoiding foul trouble, playing more minutes lately. Price tag really hasn't adjusted yet because his overall average playing time for the season is still relatively low, because we just got that very long, prolonged stretch of games where it was just constant foul trouble. So it's probably just kind of things evening out, but one way or the other, for his ceiling, he's still pretty cheap. Same goes for Cade Cunningham here at 10.5, playing really big minutes without Jaden Ivey, has the ball in his hands a ton. You see his rates go up without Ivey, but the salary has adjusted as well. And then you do get the difficult matchup against Cleveland. Tobias Harris, 5,800, is playing a lot of minutes without Ivey too, but he's just the type of player that you're probably not going to be all that interested in on a slate like this in a matchup against Cleveland. Milwaukee in a good spot taking on Charlotte. To start the day, we had Q tags on Giannis and Lillard and a probable tag on Lopez. Now we have probable tags on Giannis and Lillard and a Q tag on Lopez. If Lopez misses, and again, if I had to guess, I would think that he probably is, given that he was midday downgraded with a knee injury. But it's a 7:00 game, so I don't really care. But if he does miss, I assume you're going to get $5,600 Bobby Portis starting in his place and looking good. The one thing to keep in mind here with Portis is that he has missed a handful of games for personal reasons. So we don't know what his conditioning actually looks like. We don't know if he's actually going to go out there and play 30 minutes or not if Lopez is out. But assuming he's in the starting lineup, he should play enough minutes to be a good option here against Charlotte. If he's coming off the bench, I would take that as a pretty strong sign that he's on some sort of minutes restriction. And at that point, I would say, large field tournament only, hoping that he just kind of goes nuts in like 25 minutes. But if he starts, I think it looks good, assuming we don't get some sort of news like he's starting and limited to 22 minutes or something. Giannis, if you can get to him, great. And obviously he does become easier to get to the more value that you get. This is absolutely the type of play that I would expect to start looking better once you rerun things for Joe Val being out, for example. And you have the added benefit when you think about the highest projected players on this slate, you have Jokic at the top, but he's the same position as Rashawn Holmes. Wemby's the same position on DraftKings as Rashawn Holmes. You could play Giannis at power forward. So I have like a 7 or 8 point gap in median projection between Jokic and Giannis, but Jokic is $1,000 more, and he is obviously the same position as Holmes. So you get that salary discount, you get the opportunity cost discount at power forward going to Giannis. I do think he'll start to look a lot better once I rerun things. Same kind of thing for Dame here. 8,800. That salary is really nice. The matchup is really good. You should get plenty of minutes from him. It's just until value opens up, there's a lot of good guards. He's not going to be a priority, but he is going to start looking better once you rerun everything. If Lopez is out, you probably also get a bit more playing time for like Taurean Prince, Andre Jackson, Gary Trent, AJ Green. I don't think any of them end up looking like priorities, but AJ Green, for example, at 3,600, Gary Trent at 4,200. They are guys, Prince at 4,300, that in large field tournaments you can start to mix in a little bit. I think if Lopez is out, because they would project for a couple more minutes. On the other side for Charlotte, same injury situation for the most part that we've had lately. Vasa Micic is questionable. If he misses, I assume that one way or another, KJ Simpson is stepping into more minutes. Seth Curry would probably play more. If Seth Curry starts, this is probably not going to be the case, but I just want to put it out there. Seth Curry, so if Micic is out and Seth Curry comes off the bench, I wouldn't really think about Seth Curry too much. Normally they limit his, he doesn't play a ton when he's in that situation and comes off the bench. But when he starts, he actually pretty frequently plays more minutes than I think people expect. So that is just one of those spots where I would read very heavily into who is starting. If it ends up being Curry, I would actually project him to play like mid-20s minutes. But I just, aside from that, I assume KJ Simpson ends up playing more. He's been playing a lot off the bench anyway. And if Micic is out, then obviously a lot of those ball handling minutes are open. Keep in mind, too, that Miles Bridges is capable of playing with the ball in his hands. He already does it with Micic in, and you would probably see that more if he is out. I do find Bridges somewhat interesting in large field tournaments here. It's not a great price tag by any stretch at 9,200, but the more value that opens up, that matters less, of course. But also, he plays huge minutes. He's been playing huge minutes in these games where both LaMelo and Brandon Miller are out. And I think I just have his minutes projection a little bit higher than the industry here. Obviously, there is some blowout risk, but if this game actually goes down to the wire, you're probably getting 36, 37 minutes from Bridges. So I don't think projecting 33.5 to 34 is being overly aggressive or anything like that. I do think at basically no ownership, especially if you happen to be able to pair him with like Giannis or Lillard, something like that, where both sides, benefit if this game does stay close. Bridges goes nuts, game stays close, Giannis plays 36 minutes instead of 33.5. Something like that makes a lot of sense. The ceiling is certainly there. 4,800 for Micic, fine, whatever. If he gets in lineups, not any sort of a priority. Mark Williams up to 8,700, played 32 minutes again last game. Playing time's been really nice. There is obviously some added foul risk here, having to deal with Giannis in the paint. But the biggest deterrent on Williams is just the salary, the raw salary combined with the opportunity cost at the position. And that becomes even more difficult when you factor in, I think, that Joval is out, because now you have that Holmes piece at center. You have, assuming Kelly Olynyk starts in this Toronto game, another really good point per dollar value at center. And then you have the highest projected guy on the slate at center. You don't have a very big margin for error if you go to these mid-range centers on a slate like this, because you are really running the risk of like, okay, I played $8,700 Mark Williams. He scored 50 fantasy points. Cool. But Jokic goes for 75 and Rashawn Holmes goes for 30 and Olynyk goes for 30 and some other mid-range center that's cheaper than Williams probably also goes for 45 or 50, because there's so many that can possibly do it, that it just becomes really difficult to actually have him be the guy that you need, even if he does have a good game. Nick Smith, 5K, same kind of, just same kind of play as Micic. If you get to him, great. If you don't, I wouldn't worry about it. Washington taking on Brooklyn. So I had 50% Joval. I really liked getting to him here. This game has a very close spread. In general, that is going to make Washington look good. It's something I've mentioned on a lot of shows before. They are capable of getting destroyed by any team, regardless of the spread. But Brooklyn's not very good, and Washington is a team that is priced to be in blowouts. So when it's likely that they're not going to be in a blowout, they look very good. Joval obviously not playing. So everything that I was going to say about him and why I liked him so much, I don't need to say now. But Richaun Holmes is $3,400. He is center only. He is a solid point per minute guy. I assume that he is going to get the start and then be backed up by Tristan Vukcevic at 3K. I do think you can roll the dice on Vukcevic if you want to as the backup here. He, in 42 minutes played this season, has produced 0.98 DraftKings points per minute. Richaun Holmes has produced 0.96 DraftKings points per minute. Keep in mind, you don't have Kuzma here either. So I assume you're getting 48 minutes from those two combined because, one, Washington really doesn't play small very often at all. And when they do, it's usually going to be with Kuzma. So like them playing small here, they could go to like Anthony Gill, I guess. They could, play Champagny and really go small, but that really hasn't been what they try and do. And this is a team that doesn't have, obviously they don't care about losing games. So just why not get some minutes for Vukcevic off the bench? So I assume that they're going to be either at 48 minutes or pretty close between those two. Holmes is going to be really popular, or at least he should be. He's going to project as one of the best point per dollar values, assuming that he starts. Jordan Poole looks good. $6,500 price tag is nice. You don't have Kyle Kuzma, who's the only other really high usage guy on this team. So you don't have that to contend with. Overall this season, Poole has a 27.8% usage rate, 1.15 DraftKings points per minute. If you take Kyle Kuzma off of the floor, Poole has played 767 minutes, 1.19 DraftKings points per minute, 29.5% usage rate. Basically what you see there is that, Poole is getting increased opportunities, but you're also in a situation where there is absolutely nobody else that Brooklyn needs to worry about offensively other than Jordan Poole. So efficiency is typically going to drop, but at $6,500, he certainly has a very high ceiling. And then you get the other added benefit of he's more likely to play a bunch of minutes in this game than he is in most games. So Poole certainly looks good. I'm curious to see the starting lineup here. My guess is that Justin Champagny starts and plays limited minutes. He's only $3,200. We've seen him start and play big minutes in some games this year in place of Kuzma, but in the games where like Poole has been in, Brogdon's been in, Koulibaly's been in, he's only averaging around 19 minutes per game. I projected him for 20. At 3,200, it gets him in a lineup here or there. It's just, a dart throw. Hopefully he plays well, or the Wizards get blown out and he gets garbage time, or he just plays more minutes than I'm expecting, whatever. But not a priority. And I don't think he's likely to pick up more minutes with Joval gone, because again, I think basically the center minutes for Washington when they had Joval was 48 minutes combined between Joval and Holmes, and then whatever garbage time went to Vukcevic. Now, again, I assume you're getting basically 48 minutes from Holmes and Vukcevic. So I don't anticipate there really being much, if any, of a bump from that trade for Champagny. Maybe he plays a couple, gets a couple extra minutes, but I would kind of even doubt that. It's more so just hoping that he maybe plays well and steals some minutes from like Kispert or Carrington off the bench or something like that. Keyshawn George, 3,900, does get a little bit of a bump with Kuzma out as far as his playing time projection. I got him back up to about a 30-minute projection here. He would have been around 25 or so if Kuzma had been in. Still not any sort of a priority, but should be out there for a nice chunk of minutes. Bud Carrington's down to 3,300. Hasn't been playing a lot of minutes. Only played 12 off the bench last game. He is still contending with Malcolm Brogdon now. You have George in the starting lineup ahead of him. Obviously, you have Poole, but I would expect Carrington to play a bit more. I projected him for 23.5 minutes here. Again, not any sort of priority. Shows up a little bit. Now, if he starts, I think he's playing a lot. So do keep that in mind. And the same goes for Malcolm Brogdon. Brogdon is somebody else that we could see start. Brogdon's been playing around 22, 23 minutes off the bench since coming back from injury. He's $5,100. And if he does start this game, I would think that he looks like a good value. So again, my assumption is Champagny starts, but if that ends up being Bub Carrington or it ends up being Brogdon, I am going to like them as value plays as well. And then Koulibaly should play a little bit more too without Kuzma. That combined with it being a competitive game, most likely. Have him in for 34 minutes. He's live to get 36, 37, but he is 5,500. He's not a great point per minute guy overall this season without Kuzma on the floor. He has gotten up to 0.93 DraftKings points per minute, which is solid. So, I don't think he's a bad play or anything like that. I actually would like to have a little bit more than I had when I ran this before the show. But secondary option, I think. On the other side for Brooklyn, no priorities here either. All that we are waiting on injury-wise is Daron Sharp is questionable. If he is out, I don't think it changes too much. Like maybe Nick Claxton plays a little bit more, but I'm not even super confident in that just because of how flat Brooklyn's rotations have been. And I don't think that they're really in a hurry to change it, because if they were, they could just condense it. You also have Cam Johnson available. So that is another body that's probably playing like 26 minutes or so. D'Angelo Russell, 6,600, certainly has upside here against Washington. It's an absolutely fantastic matchup. He is doing anything he wants to do on this team. There's nobody taking the ball away from him. Ben Simmons to some extent as a playmaker, and now you have Cameron Johnson as, a higher usage guy, but you should still get Russell pretty much just doing anything he wants. He's at 1.36 DraftKings points per minute in about 300 minutes since joining the Nets, but he is up to 6,600. And the real downside for him is that Brooklyn just hasn't shown any inclination to actually play him 30 plus minutes or anything like that. He's just kind of living in this like 25 to 27 minute range. So that keeps it from being a bigger priority. Nick Claxton, 5,800, same kind of thing. Really, really good spot. And arguably even better now. Really good spot for him, but it's just the minutes. Like if Brooklyn wanted to play him 30 plus minutes, they already would be. Maybe he plays another minute or two if Sharp is out, but I assume Ben Simmons just like becomes his backup if Sharp is out. You have Johnson that can soak up minutes. You can add Tyrese Martin back into the rotation. So I still would have trouble being confident in giving like a lot more minutes to Claxton, and you really just can't afford to miss at center. And then like I was saying with Mark Williams, not that they're at the same price, but mid-range centers in general are just going to be difficult to come by when you have the best values on the slate at center and the highest projected player on the slate is at center. Memphis taking on Toronto. A lot of Q tags here, and they have different implications. We have a Q tag on Brandon Clark. We have Q tags on Marcus Smart, John Conchar, and Vince Williams Jr. The final three, Conchar, Smart, and Williams, if they are out, it doesn't matter at all. They haven't been in the rotation or in the rotation much. So if they're out, that's kind of just status quo. You can ignore it. If they're in, it's more bodies for Taylor Jenkins to add to the rotation to make things messy for most other guys that aren't, your stars. I wouldn't anticipate any of those guys playing enough minutes to actually matter for DFS. Brandon Clark does matter though. We saw it last game. I talked about it on the show. I would expect Zach Edey to play more minutes if Brandon Clark is out. If Brandon Clark is in, I think you're getting 19 to 20 minutes from Zach Edey. That's generally what he plays in games where all of Clark and Aldama and Jaren Jackson are active. But if you take any of those guys out, it's not just Brandon Clark. You take out Aldama, you see the same thing. They give Zach Edey more minutes. We saw it last game. He got up to 25. He had the massive game at like 2% owned. So if Clark is out, I think you add like 5 minutes onto Zach Edey's projection, 4 or 5 minutes, somewhere in there. And he starts to look kind of interesting at 4,800. But if Clark is in, I think it's tough to get to Edey. I think it's difficult on the slate to get to Clark. Luke Kennard, 4,300, was showing up for me a little bit. I think that probably goes away. Same with Aldama at 4,600. Those are guys that are just going to get squeezed out by more value opening up. And also, those are the types of guys that I think are going to get hurt a little bit if like Marcus Smart is back, specifically Kennard. Jaren Jackson, if you get to some of him at 8,300, great. If you can get to some John Morant, great. GG Jackson's only 3,300. He played like 26 minutes last game. But if he's somebody else that I think is hurt if Vince Williams is in and Smart is in, because then I just expect there to be a lot of bodies in this rotation. I think at 3,800, Jackson is still playable because there's volatility in his minutes. And, I projected him for 18, but I don't know. Maybe he does play 22 or 23, even if those guys are in. I basically removed Jake LaRavia from the rotation if Williams and Smart are in, and that let me get Jackson still to 18 minutes, which, as you can see, he showed up a little bit. But there is that volatility where we don't really know what the rotation will actually look like. If Smart is out, Williams is out, then I do think there's a pretty good chance you're getting like 20, 21, 22 minutes from Jackson, in which case he does become certainly more interesting at 3,800. On the Toronto side, no RJ Barrett, no Emmanuel Quickley. Chris Boucher is questionable. No Jakob Poeltl, which is big. So my assumption is that Kelly Olynyk starts. He is 3,300. He was my highest owned player when I ran everything before the show. Now I assume some of this turns into Richaun Holmes. I assume there's plenty of lineups where I have Olynyk plus Holmes. I assume there's plenty of lineups where I have Olynyk, Jokic Holmes, whatever. Olynyk's a good point per minute guy, and he has only started one game this season. He played 23 minutes, but there was a lot of garbage time in that game. I think he was going to play more if it had been competitive down the stretch. I don't view him necessarily as like one of those guys that's going to play the first quarter, second quarter, open the third, and never come back. I think he has a path to closing or at least playing fourth quarter minutes. So I do think expecting like mid to even upper 20s, if you really wanted to be aggressive, minutes from him is reasonable. I went 24 and a half. You're not going to need to get that aggressive to be getting the Kelly Olynyk. He just is obviously going to look good, assuming that he starts. My assumption for the front court here, and I do think that there is a lot of volatility. My assumption for the front court is that Olynyk starts, Orlando Robinson backs him up, doesn't play all of the backup minutes, but backs him up, and that Mogbo, if Boucher plays like 16 minutes, and then Mogbo's like the fourth guy, where Mogbo just plays like whatever minutes are available after Olynyk, Robinson, and Boucher. It could be Mogbo ahead of Robinson. I don't know. It could be Mogbo ahead of Boucher, but I'd be more surprised by that. But if Boucher plays, I actually think he's interesting in tournaments at 3,600. Like I said, I only gave him 16 minutes. I wasn't overly aggressive with playing time or anything, but he is a good point per minute guy. There are ways it can go wrong. Like there's no guarantee he steps on the floor, but he has, firmly been in the rotation when he's been healthy. So I did want to mention that. I don't think I would actually want 25% of him. That's a pretty aggressive stand. And especially, as more value opens up, he becomes less useful anyway. But I do see him a little bit differently than the industry, at least as of the time that I ran everything. Grady Dick, without Barrett and without Quickly, should play around 30 minutes or so. He's not exciting, but he is only 4,200, so he'll look like a pretty good value. Assuming Jacoby Walter stays in the starting lineup at 3,200, shooting guard, small forward eligible, he's going to look like a very good value. Scotty Barnes is going to look really good here. You have no other real playmaker or scorer on Toronto here. And while Memphis is certainly the better team, Memphis also plays at a ridiculously fast pace. So that is working in Barnes' favor as well. I'm not sure how many minutes we have without any of Barrett, Quickly, or Poeltl on the floor this year, but I'm looking. Barnes he's actually played 328 minutes without any of them. He has a 26.7% usage rate, a 30.2% assist percentage, a 12.1% rebounding percentage, 1.24 DraftKings points per minute. If you ignore Jakob Poeltl and you just look at the minutes he's played without Barrett or Quickly, it gets up to 474. He's at 1.27 DraftKings points per minute, 28.5% usage rate, 32.5% assist percentage, 13% rebounding percentage. Scotty Barnes looks very good to me here at 9,300. Also potentially plays more minutes with Quickly out. So I do think that, especially if the ownership stays relatively low, Barnes is interesting. $3,100 Jamal Shed. I think he plays every minute that Davion Mitchell doesn't play. My guess for the starting lineup is Davion Mitchell, Grady Dick, Scotty Barnes, Kelly Olynyk, and Jacoby Walter. Mitchell DNP'd yesterday, but the way that they've basically handled Mitchell so far this year is when Quickly is out, they've been starting Mitchell, and when Quickly is in, they don't play Mitchell. So my guess is that Mitchell starts. If it ends up being Shed, then obviously he looks even better. But what we've typically seen in the games without Quickly is that you get 48 minutes combined from Mitchell and Shed. So if Mitchell plays 30, Shed plays 18. If Mitchell plays the 26 that I projected, Shed plays around 22. So I do think that Shed is viable in tournaments. But again, he is somebody that loses some value once you account for, I assume, Richaun Holmes starting. Before we move on to the final there's still four. The final four games, as a reminder, and I do want to share it on the screen, the showdown tool at Run the Sims is free for the Super Bowl. That is the site that we bought at Endgame Syndicate, Utical, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, and myself. And we will be adding some stuff to the site, looking to improve some of the stuff that's already there, but they already have a very good showdown sim in place. You can do anything that you want to do, with a Sims tool over here. One thing I really like is that you can change the inputs for players. You can change the score projection, all that stuff. So one problem that I think you frequently run into if you're using other people's projections is you can look at them and say, oh, I think they have, Xavier Worthy projected for more points than he should be. I think he's going to be less involved, and DeAndre Hopkins is going to be more, whatever. But then you have to figure out how to actually adjust those projections without screwing everything up. Here, you can just go straight in and say, I think Worthy's going to get 20% of targets and Hopkins is going to get 14 instead of 24 and 11. And it's going to be reflected directly in your projections, directly in the projections that the sim uses. So I think that's really cool. It's something that I like a lot. You have the ability, to change all your settings. You can go in here and whatever filters you want, you can use. Different, disallow different positions at captain if you want to, force different stacks, whatever it may be. You can do all that in here, run your lineups, and then you get a lot of useful information as you would expect. You get your expected value over here. You get the percentage of time it finishes in different ranges of, top 1%, top 0.1%, etc. You get your predicted dupes, which is obviously really useful in Showdown. I think it's a great tool. Gives you a lot of customization options, a lot of really good feedback. You obviously can also, if you wanted to build sets, say, if the game is competitive, I like this. If the Chiefs win by 14, how do things change? You can change that, and it'll be reflected in the Sims results as well. So I think it's a great tool. Highly recommend checking it out. It is free. And if you want to go ahead and join now, we do have an annual NFL offering. Sign up for any of the NFL products. Use promo code ENDGAME. You get 10% off, not only when you sign up, but you are locked in for life at that price. So when we do add to stuff and potentially increase prices down the road, you are locked in at that 10% discount going forward. So check that out. It is free to use, and sign up now if you are planning on using it for this NFL season, which I obviously highly recommend. Now, getting back to the slate, still 4 more games to go. Alex said, do you think it's viable to play Edey on the other side of Olynyk if Clark is out? I don't really like Edey if Clark is in, because I think he just plays 19 or 20 minutes. If Clark is out, then I do think you can play Edey. Like, I think Edey would be underpriced at 4,800 if Clark is out. Couple other comments. Love Scotty Barnes here. Is GG worth a flyer? Talked about both of those. Got to Levert. Yeah, glad you found the channel, Ari. Trying to do what I can to promote it more. I've been relatively inconsistent with doing shows, so trying to be better about doing that. Yeah, so caught up on all of that. Moving on to Miami at Philadelphia. No real injury news that matters for Miami. It's pretty much status quo. Still no Jimmy Butler, etc. Bam Adebayo looks fine. Nikola Jovic looks fine. Terry Rozier looks okay. Ware, Hero. Any of these 5 guys I think are fine. Jaime Jaquez played like his normal 22 minutes last night. Not somebody I would expect to really get to on this slate. One thing that was really interesting from yesterday's rotation, and I don't honestly know what to make of it, is that Duncan Robinson only played 11 minutes. He started the game on fire. I had a ton of him, was pretty excited when he started the game really well. He only played 11 minutes. I don't know if it had to do with the hip injury that he's listed as probable for or what, but he started the first quarter. He started the third quarter. He never played any other rotations. As a result, you got 35 minutes from Jovic. You got 18 minutes from Alec Burks. I didn't project that rotation today. It seemed kind of fluky, but there is, my point here is that there is upside for Jokic to play even more than his, Jovic to play even more than his, 29 to 30 minutes that he normally plays. At 5,200, there is some upside there. Bam's been playing a ton, still has power forward eligibility at 8K. Not playing with Jimmy Butler is good for him as well. So perfectly solid option. Obviously let people down last night, but getting back to him tonight is perfectly fine. Rozier was horrible last night, but did still play like 29 minutes or so. Ted said that Spoelstra said it's because he had 3 early fouls. I don't think he fouled anybody in the fourth quarter, though. He only had 2 early fouls. Like he subbed out because of his second foul, but like to not bring him back at all is weird in the first half. And then to just play him 4 minutes, 18 seconds to open the second half and then not bring him back is completely nothing to do with the fouls. His third foul didn't come until he subbed in with, hang on. Yeah, no, he subbed in with 43 seconds to go. in the fourth quarter and picked up his third foul. So like the fouls aren't the reason. I don't know what the reason actually was. Alex asked about Naz Reid. I'll get to that one on the next game. So Miami, another just kind of secondary team here. I would think Bam is probably the guy I want to get to the most, especially as more value opens up. And then it's probably Jovic, Rozier, Ware. The big issue with Ware has nothing to do with him himself. It's just the position he plays. Same issue that we're going to have with every mid-range center, basically. On the Philadelphia side, no Joel Embiid. Andre Drummond is doubtful. Paul George is doubtful. Q tags on Eric Gordon, Kyle Lowry, and Quentin Grimes. And those matter a lot. Not that they impact usage or anything for their teammates, but they do impact minutes. So if all those guys get ruled out, then we're back in the situation we were in a couple of games ago where Ricky Council started, played a bunch of minutes, almost triple-doubled against the Celtics. Justin Edwards plays a ton. Kelly Oubre probably plays like 43 minutes. Maxey plays a lot because they just don't have other bodies, other wings. If you put a couple of those Q-tag guys in, then it's most likely that all of those wing type guys just don't play enough minutes to matter for DFS, especially on a slate like this where you have a lot of really strong plays. Power said Brook Lopez is in, so that's good to know. He is, I was going to say kind of interesting, but not a center on this slate, I don't think. So those Q tags do matter. Whether they're in or not, Tyrese Maxey is going to look like Tyrese Maxey. He's going to be a high upside play at 10K. Yabusele is going to be fine at 6K, should play a bunch of minutes without Embiid or Drummond. Oubre at 6,800, I think is a just straight secondary option if they're in. If those guys are out, though, I have Oubre in for 36.5 minutes right now. That probably turns into like 39 minutes or something if all those Q tags are out and Oubre does start to look better. But to some extent, he is also at this point priced for that. Like Kelly Oubre playing normal minutes is certainly not a $6,800 player. So mostly a secondary team here, 4,200 for Edwards. Again, just one of those value pieces that looked pretty good, or not good, but somewhat playable at 430 and probably will just be a complete afterthought by the time we get to the slate. Chicago taking on Minnesota. No Lonzo Ball, no Horton Tucker. Dallin Terry is questionable, I believe. Dallin Terry is questionable. No Kevin Huerter, no Trey Jones, no Zach Collins. None of the new guys are playing. So you do get a team that has some upside here against Minnesota, but also mostly correctly priced. Zach LaVine was out long enough before the trade that you don't have any sort of discounts there. So Kobe White, Josh Giddey, Buzelis at 4K, Patrick Williams, who I assume is going to start, the soon move Vooch. Any of these guys are fine. None of them stand out as top options. Buzelis played 31 minutes yesterday. Keep in mind, he shot 10 for 10 from the field. Whenever somebody does that, they're going to play more minutes than usual. He closed the first half over to Sunmu. That's not something that is, always going to happen. But Buzelis has become the pretty clear, sixth man, basically, for the Bulls over these last handful of games. And I do think he has upside here. I do think it's also likely he gets a little bit more ownership than he should just because of recency bias. If Dallin Terry is out, I would add a little bit more onto my minutes projection for Buzelis. Obviously different positions, but it just shifts, what positions guys are going to play. So I do think Buzelis probably plays more if Dallin Terry is out by at least, a minute or two. Just another secondary team here. Can move on pretty quickly from them. Confirmed in chat that De'Aaron Fox is starting. Yeah, I think there's volatility on those minutes too, like I talked about with San Antonio. I was getting around 10% or so when I ran stuff before the show. But really, I think in his first game with the Spurs, he could play anywhere from 30 to 38 minutes. We don't know. So I think 34 is a solid median projection. And I do like that there's that volatility. Can it be negative? Sure. And that, those lineups are just not going to be good. But at 8K, there's a lot of upside for him. Also, you just have to keep in mind, we have no idea how long the Fox plus Wemby connection is going to take to gel. How much is playing with Wemby going to hurt Fox or help Fox or whatever? We don't know. Obviously him being accustomed to playing with Sabonis is nice. It's not like he's coming from a situation where he was the clear number one and had nobody competing for playmaking or scoring. So probably shouldn't hurt his rates too bad. On the Minnesota side, still no Julius Randle, still no Dante DiVincenzo, no other Q tags on the injury report. Naz Reid at 6,300 is still going to look good. I had mentioned this on the show the other day, but I think people kind of got misled because he got hurt and played like shit in his first start without Randle. Naz Reid plays like 30 plus minutes in games that he starts going back to last season. And he had played a lot of minutes in that game against Washington before he got hurt. He just wasn't producing. And I think people kind of got the wrong idea. And then he was only 5% owned last slate for some reason. He played 40 minutes in that game. We're not expecting 40 minutes here, but we can expect a lot of minutes from Naz Reid. Still only 6,300. He looks good. Anthony Edwards looks good here at 9,800. Very good matchup against Chicago as well. And then, as more value opens up, it's just even easier to get to Reid. Rudy Gobert, same thing I've said about every other center on the slate, basically. Like he individually looks fine, but from a roster construction standpoint, it becomes very difficult. $4,900 Mike Conley probably just kind of falls off as more value opens up, but he is likely to play, 26 to 30 minutes roughly. But I think the priorities here end up being Naz Reid and Anthony Edwards. Golden State taking on Utah. Moses Moody is out, which opens up probably some minutes for Podziemski, for Hield, for Schroeder, but probably not enough to make any of them look great. I do like Steph Curry a lot at 8,300. He grades out really well in my play type model. He clearly, has a nice ceiling, and we're just getting him at one of his cheaper salaries. Curry can be tough to get to in DFS because he is relatively scoring dependent for somebody as expensive as he typically is. And so he's competing with guys that, in his price range usually, that do more and just produce more fantasy points per minute. But with the salary falling combined with a slate where there is plenty of value, I do think Steph Curry looks very, very good here. I have some interest in Andrew Wiggins at 6,800 as well. I just think that's a pretty good salary for him in this matchup. I think he looks good, but he is somebody that also probably gets squeezed a little bit the more that you go stars and scrubs. For Utah, we have a Q tag on Lauri Markkanen. If he's out, it probably doesn't have massive ramifications, but it does just kind of make everybody look a little bit better. Like you would expect a little bit of an increase in usage for John Collins. You'd expect a little bit of an increase in usage for Keontae George. Jordan Clarkson kind of just gets his one way or the other. But Utah's just another, I think, secondary team. Collins, George, Clarkson, Collier, Markkanen. Any of these guys are perfectly fine. None of them look great. None of them are priorities. None of them are guys that I really care one way or the other if I get to much of them. And then finally wrapping things up here with the Pels and the Nuggets. So Daniel Tice no longer on this team. He was traded to OKC earlier. That does actually have an impact here. We saw it last game, so I talked about it previously. Yves Missy's minutes fluctuate pretty drastically based on whether or not Zion is in. You were getting like 24-minute games from Missy when Tice was active and Zion was active. Last game with no Tice, Zion played his normal 28 minutes, and Missy played 34. On top of that, Makovic actually played 27 minutes off the bench. He was playing alongside Zion. He was playing alongside Missy. At some points, he was playing alongside both of them. I don't know that they continue doing that, but it is the same matchup, so maybe they do. But I think that you can get plenty of minutes here from Missy. All of that is mostly irrelevant, though, because on this particular slate, because he's a center and the margin for error is just so small. But at 4,900, if you wanted to get to him a little bit, there is a chance that he just kind of goes a little bit under projected. Like I hadn't gotten to actually double checking my minutes yet for this team. I do probably end up coming in a little bit higher than this 28.8 on Missy. Probably not too much higher, but probably get him to like 30 or something like that. We also saw Javonte Green start last game. Hawkins only played like 12 minutes off the bench. Alvarado played 22. Alvarado is now questionable. If Alvarado is out, you probably get a little bit more playing time for Hawkins. Probably not enough for him to matter too much in DFS. He is 4,500. It's not like he's 3,200 or anything like that. I do think Zion looks pretty good here at 8,400. Just all the usage upside opportunities in the world without Murray or Ingram or Jones. Trey Murphy gets a bump as well at 8,100. So I think this is a team where mostly you're going to want to be looking at Zion, Murphy, maybe some $7,900 McCollum, just the guys that score the most raw points. I don't think you're really going to need value from this team. One other thing, and I forgot to mention it with Toronto, I just thought about it because we're on the Pels. Apparently Toronto is in talks with the Pels for Brandon Ingram. So don't be surprised if we get some sort of shit with Toronto trading people before lock or possibly after lock. I don't know who they would be trading, but that's a team that there is some risk here with Toronto. Obviously on the Pels side, there's some risk too. Ingram not playing, but we don't know who else would possibly be included from the Pelicans. And then finally wrapping things up with Denver, a team that is going to look like a good team to get to today. Aaron Gordon is questionable. He's 4,900. If he starts, I assume he's playing around 30 minutes, and he looks like a pretty good value. Jokic is the highest projected player on the slate, and he's going to be easier to get to because of value opening up. So love getting to him where I can. Jamal Murray, 7,700, should play a bunch of minutes. And then Michael Porter Jr. and Christian Brown. Regardless of Aaron Gordon, these guys are just going to play a lot, or I expect them to play a lot. We've seen in both games where Westbrook and Watson have been out that basically Porter Jr. and Brown just soak up their minutes. You get like 40 minutes a piece from these guys. And I had expected that to be the case to some extent. They've been a little bit more aggressive with it than I thought they would, but I had expected that you would start getting 36 to 38 minutes from those guys. So I do feel relatively comfortable just projecting them to keep playing a ton of minutes. And again, this is just kind of my baseline minutes here. I'm going to end up with more than 33 minutes to Porter. I'm going to end up with more than 34 to Brown. If you want to see what I end up with, you can get my projections at the link below. 3-day free trial gets it free for you through up until the weekend. So that stuff will be updated before lock, but I'm going to end up liking Denver even more than it looks like on the screen right now. If Gordon is out, to me, the biggest change that you would expect is just that Zeke Naji plays more. Zeke Naji, I thought was going to play mid-20s in his start last game. He played 31 minutes. Now he is center only, so on this slate, you're probably not going to get to him one way or the other. But if he does start in place of Gordon, you could make the case that you can pivot like some Olynyk or Holmes to him at lower ownership, but would in general be tough to get to. Like, he's still not any sort of a priority from a fantasy point standpoint, playing alongside Jokic and Murray and those guys. But the starters for Denver are going to be a priority for me tonight, I would definitely expect. So that's all I have for you on this one. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment, all that stuff. Check out Run the Sims for the Super Bowl. Highly recommend using the Showdown tool for free. Our projections will be in there as well. And again, 10% off using promo code ENDGAME for any of our NFL products. Get in now, lock in your price while you can. Other than that, thanks for checking out the show, and I will be back again tomorrow.